Welcome to By Seat and By Saddle, Seeing North America by Car and by Motorcycle. This is part 3 of a 4-part travel diary we made of a trip to South Dakota, Wyoming, and Montana in September and October of 2011. In part 1, we described who we are, how we travel, and the route we followed. If you think you might be interested in these details, just click on the link that connects you to part 1. Again, it's probably worth having a reminder of our route. We started in Port Huron, Michigan, and traveled south into Indiana, then west across Illinois, Iowa, and finally into South Dakota. We then continued west and explored Wyoming and even a bit of Montana. Our route home was further south and took us across Nebraska. A list of what we saw and did on each of the 4 parts of this trip was shown at the start of both parts 1 and 2 and is shown here again as a refresher. At the end of part 2, we were still in South Dakota, but had just finished watching the incredible buffalo roundup in Custer State Park. We are now ready to head off into Wyoming. So come on and continue this trip with us. We will again take you along with words and photographs. It's always a pleasure to share them with you. Remember, you can stop the video at any time for a closer look at any photograph. Now it was on into Wyoming and through the Bighorn Mountains. The Bighorns are a majestic mountain formation, with the highway often bordered by stupendous cliffs. Note the highway far below us as we descend into the valley. Rounding one curve, we were most surprised to see a herd of cattle, apparently on their way through the mountains as well, but sort of huddling beside the road at the inner cliff wall. We were glad they were on the shoulder, because swerving on this road would have been suicide. We hoped they'd arrive safely wherever they were going. Strangely enough, a bit later we happened upon a plaque at a scenic overlook beside the highway. It may have provided the answer to the migrating cattle. The cattle were probably a free-range herd on the beef trail that somehow made a wrong turn onto Highway 14. Once through the Bighorns, we encountered a most interesting airplane boneyard just outside of Greybull, Wyoming. There's a video titled Ghosts of the Past at the Greybull Aircraft Boneyard with detailed pictures and information about the airplanes we saw. It can usually be seen on YouTube by simply Googling the title. This aircraft looks like a Lockheed Electra 10E and resembles the airplane that Amelia Earhart was flying when she and her navigator, Fred Noonan, disappeared over the Pacific in July 1937. The boneyard contained a most surprising find. We wondered how a Canadian military aircraft could end up in a Wyoming airplane graveyard. YouTube comments following the above video indicated that it was a C-119 flying boxcar. This model of airplane was used in the great movie Flight of the Phoenix in 1965 with Jimmy Stewart and is also available on YouTube. The drive from Greybull to Yellowstone took us almost 3 hours. The road took us through the Buffalo Bill Tunnel, which is the longest tunnel in Wyoming, and past some really incomparable scenery. Arriving at Yellowstone, we were successful in getting one of the last campsites at remote Lewis Lake. Our first impression of Yellowstone was of free-range buffalo and the large areas they had had to roam and graze. It seemed to us like they led a pretty idyllic existence. However, we were amazed at their total fearlessness of the traffic and tourists. We admit that, for us, that feeling was not mutual. We really hoped they would not see us as a threat and put a horn through our window or radiator. Yellowstone is on the Continental Divide, and the popular conception, of course, is that a raindrop falling on one side of the sign will flow to the Pacific Ocean, and a raindrop falling on the other side will flow to the Atlantic. The Continental Divide runs all the way from Alaska through Canada, the United States, Mexico, Central, and South America. The Continental Divide Trail is a scenic trail 3,100 miles long that is used by thousands of people every year, although we were not familiar with it. Yellowstone National Park is located on the crater or caldera of an enormous volcano. It is classified as a supervolcano. The crater is 30 miles wide and 45 miles long and is called the Yellowstone Caldera. Underground magma, 16 to 20% of which is currently estimated to be molten, fuels the geysers and boiling pools throughout the park. However, scientists estimate it requires 35 to 50% to be molten in order to trigger an actual volcanic eruption. A portion of the caldera is occupied by part of Yellowstone Lake. The arrival of daylight over the lake produced a sequence of images that were photographically irresistible. Emissions of steam and hot water were visible throughout much of the park, sometimes even through the water near the shores of the lake. Some of them were very energetic. These were the geysers. Castle Rock Geyser is one of them and is huge. These photos were taken during the 30 to 40 minute steam phase that follows the eruption of boiling water and steam. We didn't see the energetic discharge, but the geyser column can apparently be up to 75 feet high. The Old Faithful Geyser is the best known because of its regularity. We went inside the information station to find out when it was scheduled to erupt. Inside the information station, they had a sign indicating the time of the next eruption. They also had a display on the wall that told us when to expect not only Old Faithful, but 5 other geysers as well. We didn't notice the smaller display beside the geyser schedule until it sort of jumped out at us later. There are bears and wolves in the park. I'm not sure how far 100 yards is, but if I saw some, I wouldn't stick around long enough to do any measuring. We didn't take any video of Old Faithful, but I was interested in knowing how long the eruption continued. The camera timestamp on these 4 photographs turned out to be a good way of recording how long it actually lasted. The ground crust is very unpredictable in this area, with more than a dozen people scalded to death and hundreds more seriously burned and scarred in the past. We really obeyed the rules and never stepped off the boardwalk. However, we did notice buffalo pies at several places on the crust, and park guides told us that buffalo often fall through the crust in hot spring areas, are badly burned, and must be euthanized by the park rangers. We tried Googling a bit more information about the incidents, but details are scarce. A few of the boiling pools in the park are shown in the following photographs. The colors are produced by microscopic life forms and vary according to the temperatures of the pools. There are also wide variations in the size, contours, and features of the pools. The Yellowstone River is a tributary of the Missouri River. It feeds Yellowstone Lake and has 2 main waterfalls in Yellowstone Park. The upper falls are 109 feet or 33 meters high. The lower falls on the Yellowstone River are 308 feet or 94 meters high, nearly twice as high as Niagara Falls. The so-called Grand Canyon of the Yellowstone, through which the Yellowstone River flows, averages about 1,000 feet deep. Since grizzly bears had just killed 2 people in 2 separate incidents, we took all the park regulations about campsite food and other stuff really seriously. On our guided wilderness walk, a ranger pointed out some grizzly claw marks on a tree. That really discouraged straggling. In fact, one of the current, that is 2011, fatal grizzly attacks had occurred less than 2 miles from this location. There were buffalo everywhere in the park, and the bulls seemed to go out of their way to slow or stop the traffic on the road. No idea why they would do this, as I would think grazing would be much preferable to standing on hot pavement. It seems even buffalo have their little opportunists. Buffalo calves tend to stay close beside their mothers, but there were no adult females near these 2 little guys. Well, this is the end of Part 3. In Part 4, we visit the Buffalo Bill Historical Center and learn a great deal about the culture of the Plains Indians and the life and times of the great American showman William Frederick Cody. We also ride over to the Heart Mountain Japanese internment camp. It was built for Americans of Japanese descent who were relocated from the West Coast and interned during World War II. We found the site profoundly moving. Our stay in Wyoming concludes with a motorcycle side trip along the Beartooth Mountains into Montana. We complete our trip by loading the motorcycle onto our trailer for our return home.